DawgNation. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, and it is good to have you with us. Love Tuesdays around here because that means we get a chance to catch up with Jeff Sentell here in just a moment for our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. Jeff will give us all the latest on that 2019 closeout of the recruiting class. This is an important conversation with Jeff today on the heels of the fact that Georgia just hosted a number of major recruits this past weekend. So Jeff will give you some inside details on that. I'll also tell you about how you can join us next week at this time at the Marlowe's Tavern in Kennesaw. That's going to be an awesome event. And speaking of Jeff, I'm actually going to begin the show today by addressing something that Jeff wrote, a recruit told him. And to me, I think this is an eye-opening statement, and it shows you some work that Georgia still needs to do in terms of how the program presents itself in the recruiting trail. Dominating most position groups when it comes to recruiting. Maybe one group still lagging behind just a bit. We'll tell you all about that as we get started here. DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know that cartoon gif of the guy holding like the club in his hand and he's whacking the horse that's laying down there on the ground? Obviously, a reference to beating a dead horse. Y'all go ahead and get that one up and running here because I know some of you are going to say that's what I'm doing. But off the top of the program, I do feel like I have to point out something that I read at DawgNation.com this week. I want to make sure you see it. Now, this is not a criticism from me for the recruit that said this, but it is an eye-opening statement in terms of some work that I think that Georgia still needs to do. As Georgia gets ready to close out its 2019 recruiting cycle in February, there are a few major targets still on the board. I'm fascinated to see how Georgia manages these numbers, which positions Georgia prioritizes, and what work Georgia's able to do to get this taken care of here for the class of 2019. But over the course of the long haul, beyond just 2019, one of the issues that I see facing Georgia is that need to upgrade the level of recruit that Georgia's bringing in at the wide receiver position. Another obvious response will end up being, yeah, B.A., but what about Dominic Blaylock? And my retort is always, when Blaylock is referenced, that it's great to have Blaylock, and I believe that Georgia also needs more than just Dominic Blaylock when it comes to elite wide receivers in the program moving forward. With that in mind, how really top-flight receivers view Georgia is going to be really important here. Now, in just a couple of minutes when Jeff Sentell joins us as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All, I will ask him about this quote, but I wanted to make sure you all saw this first. It's 2020 wide receiver E.J. Williams. He's from Phoenix City, Alabama. I believe that's the same high school that Justin Ross went to, the Clemson receiver. So this is a school that's got a pedigree of putting out really good wide receivers. E.J. Williams is sort of the latest in that line there. I took a recent visit to the University of Georgia, has talked to DawgNation and Jeff Sentell about that. And in terms of his viewpoint about Georgia, it's a favorable one. In terms of how he feels about the program, he really likes it. But there is something that he kind of also offers into this conversation that he also adds into this, and this is the part where I think that Georgia's really got some work to do. If you're watching on video, let me show you this quote. If you're listening radio or podcast, I'll obviously read it to you. What E.J. Williams, the four-star wide receiver, says is, right now, I fit at Georgia in my eyes. But here's where I think it gets really important for the work that Georgia's got to do going forward. He says, I fit well at Georgia in my eyes, even though they are and these words jump off the page to me, run-heavy school. That's a big thing for me, too. They don't throw the ball that much. That's E.J. Williams referencing his viewpoint about the Georgia offense. And, listen, just based on the overall statistics, it's hard to deny what Williams says here. Obviously, Georgia is a program that has become RBU. Todd Gurley in the Super Bowl, Sony Michel in the Super Bowl. That's a reputation that Georgia comes by honestly and naturally. And in terms of the overall balance between running plays and passing plays for the team right now, that's still an imbalance in favor of running the ball. But the point that I have been making, and obviously I guess this to a certain degree comes from some sort of a red and black colored position, but the point that I've been making is that the presence of really good running backs at Georgia and the presence of really big dominant offensive linemen at Georgia shouldn't be a reason to dissuade wide receivers from wanting to come to the program. It really ought to be a reason why big-time wide receivers want to join up and be a part of the program because, as we've said before, just basic football 101, when you've got really big offensive linemen, when you've got really good running backs, you've now got safeties and extra defenders creeping into the box, trying to stop the run, which ought to create more opportunities for one-on-one man coverage for receivers to really exploit that, and for a guy like that at a position truly become a superstar, maybe put himself in the first round of the NFL draft based on the work that he does in college. Plus, to add to all of this, and I know I've mentioned this before, but when you look at the way the college football playoff was decided this year, when you look at the 5-year history of the college football playoff, almost every, not even almost, every national champion has had that elite near 1,000-yard receiver, and that's the threshold that Georgia also needs to cross over as well. Now, it's trying to do that work right now, and maybe it may already have the pieces in place to actually break through in this way in 2019. So let's also, give the full context here. First of all, this past weekend, Georgia did have a chance to host a 5-star receiver in George Pickens. He's one of those guys that could, if he were to choose Georgia and everything works out with his, path towards playing college football next season, he could be that perfect tandem to go along with another freshman like Dominic Blaylock. I guess you take this as a measure of good news. If you look at Pickens' Twitter header right now, and you go to his Twitter page where all his tweets are housed, the top of his Twitter header is him in that Georgia jersey going back to his visit last weekend. Now, that may just be the visit high, and that may not necessarily be signifying that Pickens is necessarily favoring Georgia right now over the school that he's committed to, Auburn, or the other schools like LSU and Tennessee that he's also considering. But it certainly doesn't hurt to have a guy like George Pickens showing himself in a Georgia uniform at the top of his Twitter headers. That's a degree of good news. And as Georgia fans who are listening to this right now or watching this right now are going to pound their fist and shout at their device, BA, you're still not giving enough credit to the receiver who will be at Georgia, the 5-star guy, Dominic Blaylock. And listen, I want to make sure that we do give full credit and full description of the possibility of what Blaylock might be for Georgia next season. He truly could be a special player, both in terms of the tangible qualities, who he is as a football player, and those intangible qualities that he possesses in terms of his potential for leadership off the field and just overall level of dedication and commitment to working on his craft and getting better. I mean, in fact, when Blaylock has spoken to DawgNation in the past, that's one of the things that he's talked about, that when he views himself and what makes him attractive to a program like Georgia, one of the reasons why Georgia was so interested in Blaylock for so long, as Blaylock himself explains, it's more than just what he does on the football field. In fact, here is Dominic Blaylock on that point.
He's a good player on and off the field, a quick player that's quick on the field and everywhere else, and just a player that's worked hard.
And one of the things you love about Blaylock in that regard is, while that clip and that quote certainly seems to have a little bit of humility baked into it, it's not the kind of humility that makes Blaylock want to shy away from the competition or makes Blaylock want to shy away from the really big goals in his first year at Georgia. Yes, he's going to be good on and off the field, not causing a lot of drama, not causing a lot of diva-ish behavior, but in terms of his overall goals and objectives for the season, he does want to be a major part of the Georgia offense. I think that's great news. Georgia needs to highlight and showcase a receiver that has the talent level that Blaylock possesses, and it's great to hear Blaylock himself saying, I'm looking to come to Georgia and earn a big reputation for myself right away. Here's more of what he told to Jeff Sentell about that, going back to the All-American Bowl in San Antonio a couple of weeks ago.
When you get to Georgia, you're going to have an opportunity to play. How are you going to go about your business? What will be your mindset going in?
Just always work hard on and off the field, and just ball out and hopefully I get a starting position.
Now listen, as a 40-plus-year-old dude with a pair of khaki pants on right now, the phrase ball out is probably not one I should be using on the regular basis, but if I could borrow that phrase from Blaylock here for a moment, balling out is exactly what Georgia needs a wide receiver to do. So guys like E.J. Williams, who's not wrong to say what he said, but you want the reputation, the future of the Georgia program to be one of those things where wide receivers don't have to say, they're a run-heavy school. They don't throw the ball that much. The presence of a guy like Dominic Blaylock can certainly change that. Now, it's also worth pointing out here a couple of things in terms of the receivers already on the Georgia roster. First of all, Kirby Smart, it should be pointed out, likes this group a lot. And my obsession with 5-star names like Pickens or Blaylock or Hazelwood before that, my obsession with this kind of stuff, from Kirby Smart's perspective, sometimes when it comes to the guys that really pan out and do big things in a Georgia uniform, sometimes it's not always the 5-star guy who ends up doing that. And Kirby Smart let us all know that back in the summer before the 2018 season began. Here's some of what Kirby Smart said then.
We're going to play the guys that play the best. We're going to play the guys that practice the best. We're going to play the guys that bust their butt and go out there and help the team. And there's a lot of them that are helping on special teams. I'm very pleased with our receiver room. top to bottom. I think they're competing hard. They're playing hard. They're making good plays, and they're really helping on special teams. But it's what they came in as. I'm not into that. I'm into the team environment. Can you help our team? And if you can, then I'm going to reward you by helping our team. But I can't promise you a number of touches and catches. The goal is to win the game.
It's also worth pointing out the confidence that Kirby Smart showed in those receivers, the guys that were on the Georgia roster this season. At the beginning of the year, his quarterback, Jake Fromm, essentially echoed that same sentiment at the end of the year, going into the SEC championship game against Alabama, knowing they had the possibility of facing some man coverage there that day. Fromm said, I'll take my receivers against any defensive backs in the country, even the team that ended up winning the SEC championship this season. Here is what Fromm said about that.
I feel very comfortable with our guys anytime they're manned up on anybody. From all the work we do throughout the summer, throughout fall camp, throughout the season, our guys are making plays right now. They're doing an awesome job, creating separation versus man coverage, whether it's zone, whether it's man. Our guys are doing a great job.
So listen, with all due respect to Fromm there and Smart there, I understand what they're both saying, and I think to a degree they are both right in what they do say. I would suggest that my opinion on this is not, the opposite of theirs. It's just slightly different in terms of what I'm choosing to focus on. It's great to have a committee of really good receivers, which is what I think Georgia had in 2018, and to a certain extent what they also had in 2017 as well. But to change the minds of guys like E.J. Williams or maybe George Pickens or, other 2020 wide receivers that we're going to talk a lot about in the months ahead, to really change their mind about Georgia being the place that elite receivers want to play, you've got to have more than just a committee of good receivers. You've got to have a breakout name. Now, maybe Riley Ridley helps that a bit in the draft. Maybe he gets drafted really high, and that raises the reputation of Georgia wide receivers. Or maybe a guy like Blaylock shines in his first year in the Georgia program. Either way, there are some steps that Georgia can take, and if they do take them, then the Georgia receiving corps may be viewed as favorable in the recruiting trail as some of the other position groups are. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you. Thank you for being with us live today on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast pretty much wherever you can find podcasts, including we post the show every day, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We kind of like to think of the podcast sort of the on-demand way to listen to the program. You don't have to be live. You don't have to be in the moment. You can go back and check it out later on, and many of you find that to be convenient. We really appreciate that. And by the way, whether you watch video, listen radio, participate in the podcast, whatever you do, if you enjoy DawgNation Daily, we'd love to meet you and speak to you in person next week. It's 1 week from today. We are making our very first appearance, first DawgNation event we've done in Kennesaw ever before at the Marlowe's Tavern in Kennesaw. It's 1 week from today from 6 to 8 p.m. Right there at the Marlowe's in Kennesaw, 745 Chastain Road in Kennesaw. What a great event this is going to be from 6 to 8 p.m. That's going to be right there, very close to the beginning of the early signing period, or I should say the old school national signing day in February. Jeff Sentell is going to be with us. Some really great insight into what Georgia's going to do to finish off its class. Jeff Sentell will provide that, and you're going to want to be a part of that with us a week from today. Marlowe's in Kennesaw from 6 to 8 p.m., 745 Chastain Road. And if you're listening, I'll say that one more time so you can write it down. 745 Chastain Road. Put that into your navigation device and come on out and see us next week from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Marlowe's in Kennesaw. How much fun is that going to be? Now, speaking of Jeff Sentell, we're going to get to him in just a moment as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All today. Also, later on the program, you may have heard the Kentucky guy take a little bit of a shot at DawgNation yesterday. We'll have a brief, rebuttal to that coming up later on in our program. Before any of that, though, let me go around the doghouse here, brought to you by Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. And I'll tell you more about how you can get in touch with Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa coming up in just a couple of minutes. Before that, though, the big issue on yesterday's show was the addition of Georgia's very impressive new defensive backs coach, Charlton Warren. I think it's a show of strength from Georgia to kind of go out and take him from Florida. We played some audio yesterday of some of the things that Warren said about his background. This is a pretty impressive guy. I think he aids Georgia's recruiting efforts automatically. I think announcing that hire with Kyrie Lam on campus for the official visit was one of Kirby Smart's most, shrewd moves, depending on your perspective. Almost a dastardly move to be able to do that, the way that Kirby Smart did that. And yet, when it comes to the SEC, listen, the guys that you're trying to kick around, they don't stay down forever. They're going to try to make their response, and They're going to try to get back into competition. Georgia takes Charlton Warren. Florida acts quickly. I saw this tweet from Dan Mullen announcing the hiring of Torian Gray, a guy that spent the last 2 years in the NFL as a defensive backs coach. Long time before that at Virginia Tech. He was Florida's defensive backs coach also in 2016. Mullen tweets out, "Welcome back to DBU, Torian Gray. Excited to have you and your family in Gainesville." This is a guy that's got a pretty good reputation on the coaching trail, and Florida's already trying to spin this as a big move for the program in the absence of losing Charlton Warren. I saw one of their reporters, Luke Stampini, who works for 24/7 Sports, he kind of put this out on Twitter as, hey, this may be an example of Florida actually getting an upgrade over Charlton Warren. Stampini says they clearly got a good one, perhaps an upgrade, he says, when it comes to Torian Gray. So the spin control's already out in Gainesville when it comes to this. There's no doubt that Gray's got a pretty nice coaching resume as an upgrade over Charlton Warren. I don't know that I'd go that far, but I will say that when it comes to the battle over Khair Elam, it certainly may not be, and we'll let Jeff Sentell tell us more about this in just a moment, it may not be one of those things where, getting Charlton Warren alone is the checkmate that leads to Khair Elam becoming a member of Georgia's 2019 class. By hiring Gray as quickly as it did, maybe this is Florida's way of staying in this competition for Elam, obviously given the fact that Elam does have some ties to the University of Florida. So this, for me, bears a story very much worth watching here, as these two rivals that haven't always been recruiting rivals, haven't always chased the same players all that much, but in the case of Khair Elam, that's definitely what's going down here. Georgia and Florida both looking to acquire this big four-star defensive back, and they both hope that recent defensive back coaching hires give them a chance to do that. It's Around the Doghouse here, brought to you by Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. It's in beautiful Towns County, Georgia. I had a chance to be there a couple of months ago. You want to talk about just one of the great spots to go and relax and unwind, especially, this time of year. I think there's nothing prettier than the winter in the beautiful North Georgia mountains. I love the views there. You can just see forever. Got the crackling fire in the fireplace. It is an unbelievable resort and a great way for you to get away. I know a lot of you probably just enjoyed that for the MLK holiday weekend we just came off of. You got President's Day coming up. You got a lot of times to sort of sneak away and enjoy that time there at Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. I cannot recommend it enough, and I'd love to have you check it out if you've never been there before. Go to brasstownvalley.com. That's the address once again, brasstownvalley.com. You can find out about some special offers they have, some terrific things they have going on there, and why it's the kind of place that you and your special someone want to sneak away to, your whole family, play some golf, enjoy the lake nearby. Just really, really great stuff there. Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. BrasstownValley.com is the website to go to find out more about that. All right, we are busy on today's program. I told you about some coaching moves in the SEC. There are a couple of others also worth your attention. I'll give you those later on as well. But for now, here on DawgNation Daily, let's find out more from Jeff Sentell about the latest of the 2019 recruiting class for Georgia. Elam, Pickens, everybody else. Let's welcome him to the program right now. And we shall get Jeff coming up in just a moment here. Jeff has asked for a little bit of delay, bringing him on the program here. So we'll get Jeff in just a moment. The great news is that gives me a chance to squeeze in some of your phone calls before we welcome in Jeff to the program here. So let me pull up Facebook and YouTube. We can kind of be free flowing and some comments, and we'll catch up with Jeff here in just a couple of minutes when he's ready to join us. Let me pull up on Facebook here first, and we'll dive into those. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on where you think things stand with Khair Elam right now, or where you think things stand with the overall state of Georgia wide receiver recruitment. I'd love to hear both those ideas from you, and pretty much anything else you want to address right now. We'll have a chance to do just that on the program here for a couple of minutes. All right. Some of y'all talking about D-Rob. Chris Dean mentions him. Yeah, listen, D-Rob is still one of those guys, and, it's probably worth pointing out, I played the Kirby Smart audio a moment ago. It's actually Demetrius Robertson's name that Kirby Smart audio is in reference to, the idea that stars don't always matter. And, obviously I wrote a lot about Robertson when he first became eligible at Georgia as one of those guys that I thought could have been an impact player for Georgia last year. Now, as it turns out, what Kirby Smart predicted then was right. It's really more about how you fit into the totality of the program. Can you contribute on special teams? Are you willing to block? Are you willing to be a physical part of this? But, even with, some of the other receivers we've talked about on the recruiting trail, the need to occasionally block, the need to have that be a part of your repertoire as receiver, that is not an impediment to also success catching the football. I think that J.J. Holloman and the breakout year that he had for Georgia is certainly an example of that. This is a guy that did throw some massive blocks. I mean, the way that he cleaned the clock on that Kentucky safety that led to the DeAndre Swift touchdown that turned that game into a blowout, essentially put the game on ice in Lexington. That was Holloman's handiwork there, but he also became a big-time receiver for Georgia this season as well. So I don't think that, the need to block, the need to be physical, the need to contribute on special teams precludes you from also having some stardom as a receiver as well. And, what Kirby Smart said back in August turned out to be right. Now, for those of you that have Robertson on your mind, hopefully that year spent in the program of, seeing how it really works at UGA, hopefully that made an impact on him, and my guess is that it probably will. Robert Barnes also mentioned Micaiah Tongue, who I do think has the chance to be a really interesting player at Georgia. I think he's a unique name in the fact that he's going to have to figure out the position that he fits best in, and I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, I think there's a really good chance that for Tongue, it ends up being more likely the defensive side of the ball than the offensive side of the ball. But for now, to begin with, it does look like he's going to get a chance to start on offense, and that gives him a chance to impress. He's certainly got those physical attributes that give him a chance to do some interesting things. John William Adams says, my question on Kyrie Lam is, did he love it more or surprise more on the new hire of Charlton Warren? Yeah, I would love to be kind of a fly on the wall when that's revealed, when a guy like that finds out that Warren is coming to the University of Georgia. My guess is it's a combination of both, really, really happy and probably really, really surprised there as well. I mean, I'm guessing there's probably some of that. You certainly saw a degree of surprise from the Twitter account of a guy like, say, Nick Cross, who had those eyeball emojis going across the screen over that. So I think there's probably a measure of both. And, I don't think Warren alone is probably the thing that gets Kyrie Lam to want to shut down when it comes to Florida. But they've already had their chance to host him on their official visit. And what Florida sold him at that time is kind of not what they're going to be selling moving forward. It's just a little bit kind of different name. And listen, y'all know, I mean, I've got our buddy Eddie on the set right here. Y'all know around here we believe that good Georgia fans are Gator haters. So maybe this comes from the perspective of being, a tried and true Gator hater. But it's going to be hard for me to have Torian Gray sold as some big-time coaching hire when he spent the last 2 years in the NFL, a part of coaching staffs blown out really in both places, and now he's coming back to Florida, a job that he had in 2016. And my thought on that's going to be, you can't exactly sell this as a coach on the rise when he's sort of back at the same spot he was in 2016. We're talking this before the show. This guy's in his 40s, and to my knowledge, has kind of only been a defensive backs coach. That's not a lot of upward mobility here. Listen, as a defensive backs name, when you've had the resume that he's put together, there's probably no doubt he's really good at being that position coach. But, boy, there's something about, the sort of hard-charging, fast-paced nature of the way that coaches climb the ranks right now. Gray is a little bit of an outlier in comparison to that. So does that mean that he's just really, really committed to being the best defensive backs coach that he can be, or does that mean something else? I guess it sort of depends. Bobby Bryan checking in from Hudson, Florida. Bobby, appreciate that. Myra Herbert Bush says, Elam, come be a dog, be part of a great program. Myra, I think that's a pretty good pitch, and I'm sure that Elam is listening in very closely to pitches like that from a lot of folks just like yourself. Craig Wasick says, who's going to take over for McCole Hardman next year? I think that could be really interesting to see, not just in that receiver role. Hardman was Georgia's second leading receiver this year, but also in that special teams role, which I'm assuming what the commenter mentions in terms of, who is going to be Georgia's punt returner next season? How will the Georgia kick return game look? I think there are a few options there. I would expect, a guy like Garris Jackson gets a look there in that regard. I could see James Cook getting a look in that regard. I mean, the good thing is when Georgia has recruited the skill positions, the athletic positions, as well as it has, it's going to have no shortages of guys that can get in there and do that. But when you look at the impact that Hardman was able to make as a punt returner, there's no denying at all that Hardman was important there in that regard. The average field position he gave for the Georgia offense with those returns was obviously really valuable. So Georgia's going to need to find somebody to fill that void. And my guess is they probably will. Let me go over to YouTube here for a moment. Graham Dickerson likes the idea of Garris Jackson there in that role. Yeah, I think that Jackson's a really interesting player for Georgia next season. I think that's a really interesting name. Alan Young says, has Dan Mullen ever beaten UGA? I guess you could give him the win going back into the early days of his time there at Mississippi State, but certainly in head-to-head matchups favoring Mullen and Smart, Kirby Smart's been the dominator there, whether it be, 2 times head-to-head as head coaches with Kirby at UGA or, going back for a long time with Kirby as the defensive coordinator battling Mullen as a head coach at Mississippi State. It's one of the things I always think is funny. There are a lot of Florida fans who want to sell you Mullen being a better coach than Smart, somehow a better tactician, on-field coach, and yet they try to push that narrative without there really being any evidence to support that whatsoever. Smart has had his way with Mullen over the years, so this notion that Kirby's just a recruiter and somehow Dan Mullen's some sort of wizard on the sideline. Honestly, when you look at the overall stats of head-to-head between these two guys in a career spanning Smart's DC years and now head coach years, you just don't see much evidence for that. Justin O says Fromm will distribute the ball to whomever wants to get open, and I would imagine there's probably going to be a lot of that for the Georgia offense next season. They will, as you say, look to throw to the open man, but you can't discount, you can't discredit the need for a star to emerge here at some point in time. I think that Georgia needs some of that. I really do. I think that Georgia needs to have a big-time name pop up at wide receiver the way that Fromm himself has become a little bit of a star, and running backs have become celebrity superstar-type names. Georgia needs to find that guy at wide receiver here, too. Cameron Merrill says, I have to give Muffin some credit. He means Mullen. That's kind of the funny nickname for Dan there. For Felipe Frank's development this year, he went from bad to average. It's actually kind of a funny line from Cameron, and to a certain extent, I guess that's probably true. And listen, if you want to look ahead to 2019, I think one of the things that Florida is going to have a little bit of an issue with is it is still dealing with some quarterback stuff. And, Mullen has this reputation as being something of a quarterback whisperer, but you can only work with what you have to work with. And listen, at this point in time, Felipe Frank's been around the block a few times, and at this point, he sort of is what he is, and I'm not sure that Mullen can do much to change that. I guess my concern would be, if I was a Florida fan, is that Emory Jones was supposed to be the centerpiece of your 2018 class. That was supposed to be a really big get. A long-time Ohio State commit, a guy that had been in the mix at Alabama and places like that, Georgia, I guess, too, to a degree before Justin Fields committed inside. Why don't we hear more from Emory Jones as a freshman in a day and age in which freshmen in the SEC are just playing all over the place? Why wasn't there more of an impact for Emory Jones, and why isn't the possibility of him becoming the starter as a true sophomore, or I guess in his second year, I'm assuming he probably redshirted, but in his second year in the program, why isn't that more of an option here when the alternative is a quarterback like Frank's? It's been pretty unspectacular. If I was a Gators fan, that would be the thing that would get me concerned right now. GB2 says Mullen has better recruit possibilities in Florida than he had in Mississippi State. That's true. He'll be working with better talent, and right now there's no question that Florida's benefiting from the fact that Florida State's a little bit of a mess and Miami's a little bit of a mess. Now, Miami with Manny Diaz, maybe they're going to change that and build some recruiting momentum. Certainly seem on their way to doing that. Florida State, Willie Taggart, the head coach, has got a reputation for being a really good recruiter, but the on-field product's been pretty bad. So Florida would seem to be in a pretty good spot to, kind of take advantage of the fact that the other programs in the Sunshine State aren't doing very well right now. But listen, I think it's also worth pointing out for the people who follow recruiting pretty closely is that Florida had been just really a very diminished roster by the weaknesses that Jim McElwain had showed in recruiting. So, Mullen's got a lot of work to do just to get back to essentially a zero in terms of, just sort of a roster neutrality. As it stands right now, it's been a very weak roster at the University of Florida. Let me go back over to Facebook here for a moment. Michael Johnson on the subject of James Coley. Using a fullback. He says he used it pretty often in his Miami offenses. We've got a pretty good fullback on scholarship. I don't know, maybe that's a reference to Nate McBride. A lot of people seem to want to think that McBride could be a fullback at Georgia. I don't know if fullback's going to be a part of the Georgia roster going forward. I watched the Patriots again on Sunday. They had a lot of fullbacks in, did a lot with that, what you call, like a 21 or 22 personnel. They seem to do a lot of that. I'd love to see Georgia do that more, fullback in with one of those, great-looking running backs behind them there. But I just don't know. It just does not seem like what Kirby Smart wants to do. He certainly doesn't want to use a scholarship on that role and doesn't even seem like he wants that to be a part of the offensive game plan right now. Let me go over to Elite Baller says, I like Facebook. I've been on YouTube now for several minutes. And by the way, if you're just joining us a little late, we're going to get Jeff Sentell coming up in just a couple of minutes. He asked for a bit of a delay here, so we'll get him in just a minute. Right now, we're giving you a chance to weigh in and do some comments. And I will, later on, as some of you mentioned in the comment section earlier, we'll reference our buddy up in Kentucky who had some problems with DawgNation yesterday. We'll reference that a little bit. Yeah, Spencer Moore says, "BA, did you hear about that?" Yeah, I heard a little bit about that. Some of y'all told me about it. I didn't happen to be watching the show when it happened, but I did. Some of y'all did tell me about it though, so we'll reference that a little bit later on. James Bryant says on the goal line and short yardage, he says you'd like to have a fullback in the game. And that's probably true. The one thing I saw where Bill Connolly from Football Study Hall, if you want to go back to December when he wrote about the Georgia offense and its issues with the goal line offense, what Connolly said is that it wasn't so much the personnel that Georgia had in, should have had a fullback in more. It's the fact that he thought that Georgia wasn't passing the ball at the goal line enough. And if you want to tie this back into where we kind of started the show with the wide receivers and maybe doing a better job of creating a better reputation for Georgia when it comes to wide receivers, maybe not being quite so conservative at the goal line may be a big issue. If you look at those 6 or 7 plays that Georgia got stopped on that one drive against Florida, similar problems against Kentucky, even had some issue with that against Auburn as well. If you look at the commonality that a lot of those plays seem to have, there was some just goal line stuff. Some conservative, stuff down there at the goal line of just, trying to, run the same running play or quarterback sneak over and over again. And, I think it was Conley referencing something that the legendary coach Bill Walsh had once said about, you got to be a little bit creative. You got to mix in those passing plays down there. As many of you know, the defense just gets packed tightly together, close within the end zone, and all of a sudden, it becomes just a little bit harder to break up that bunch of defenders. Jill Cobb-Berg says, might have to listen to Jeff on the recording. Jill, if you've got to run away and do some stuff, we appreciate you being with us as much as you can be. Robert Barnes says, some of us offensive guards as fullbacks and short yardage plays. Yeah, you've seen, Georgia put those 40-something numbers on, offensive linemen. Justin Schaefer did that a little bit last year, may do that more this year. I want to say at least in one game, Cade Mays was wearing the 42 number. So they put them in a number that would certainly work there for that. Robert Barnes also says he thinks that Brian Harrien's going to show out this year. Yeah, I love the piece the other day that Chip Towers wrote about Brian Harrien and the fact that Harrien probably did have an opportunity to transfer, chose not to do that, apparently seems content to stay at Georgia. And given the flashes that he's shown in a Georgia uniform, don't be so quick to assume that he can't have an impact on the Georgia roster here this season. I think there's a chance that Harrien may still be heard from as a Georgia running back, a part of that competition between a healthy Zamir White, an emerging James Cook, and obviously DeAndre Swift. I think that Harrien could really mix in on all that. That could be really fun. All right, so we got more to do later on, but as of now, it is time to rock and roll. Our buddy Jeff Sentell is ready to go. A lot of recruiting stuff with him. I'll address the wide receiver thing off the top, and we're just really glad to have you with us as DawgNation Daily rolls on right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Time for Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All with Jeff Sentell. And as we said, next Tuesday, 1 week from today, DawgNation makes its first ever appearance at the Kennesaw location. Cannot wait for that, for our countdown to signing day next Tuesday, 6 to 8 p.m. Jeff Sentell will be there, and there'll be a lot of juicy stuff to get into there then. Plenty to get into right now as well. So, Jeff Sentell, with that in mind, good morning. Thanks for being with us here on the program today, and I hope that this Tuesday finds you doing well.
Hey, Brandon, man, it was a great Tuesday, man. I got everybody's got things to do. It's a busy week. My daughter's getting braces on today, so I'm juggling that with a lot of stories that are going to go up on DawgNation today. Might put a 2 or 3 or 4 spot up there today on DawgNation, so everybody needs to be looking out for that.
Yeah, we'll look forward to checking out DawgNation.com for more on that. And Jeff, I want to actually begin our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All by looking at something else that you've recently written at DawgNation.com, a quote that really jumped out at me. And as I said before you joined us, I don't criticize the recruit for saying this. I sort of criticize the program for having this established as its narrative right now and its reputation. E.J. Williams talking about Georgia being a run-heavy school and a school that doesn't throw the ball very much. Now, that doesn't seem to be the kind of thing that's going to dissuade him from maybe choosing Georgia. It seems like Georgia's right there in the mix. But the point that I made before you joined us is, Jeff, that is a branding issue that UGA's got to change. There's no reason why the presence of really good offensive linemen and really good running backs, there's no reason that should turn off wide receivers. If anything, they ought to want to play with a team that's got that much talent, because it ought to be opening up other opportunities for them there. But for some reason, either because Georgia's not selling itself well enough or because recruits just aren't buying it, for some reason, that seems to be the narrative that Georgia's not the place to be for wide receivers. What did you make of what Williams said to you, and what do you make of the overall narrative when it includes Georgia and the wide receiver position right now?
Now, Brandon, this is you, man. Just channeling some of that inner Munson, man. Sometimes I hear out of you sometimes. So you looked at that story about a guy with Clemson and Dream School, still his favorite team. And I tried to, his thoughts there about the run game and the throw game and how Georgia is a good fit for him, except they don't throw it enough. That needed to be in there. But this was also a young man who gets it. If you saw that passage in the story where he talked about Todd Gurley and how Gurley brought fire to the backfield and how much he likes to block. I didn't want to bring up heartburn from anybody with the 2019 class about receiver recruiting. This to me just seems like a guy who gets Georgia football, and maybe gets Georgia football in the way that a lot of our listeners here today would.
Yeah, so you're right. There's a lot more to the story than that just one quote, but the quote to me is certainly, I guess, newsy from the standpoint that it kind of fits into some of the other stuff that's been going on. I mean, I hate to drag the Hazelwood name back in this a little bit, but I can't help but think back to that quote he once gave you when you're like, hey, how's Georgia tell you they're going to use you? And he kind of shrugs his shoulders and says, I don't know. I guess they say I'll be the X receiver, or, whatever it was that Hazelwood said. There is a part of me that wonders, is Georgia just not selling itself to receivers as well as it sells itself to offensive linemen and outside linebackers and inside linebackers and running backs and now seemingly defensive backs? Is this just an issue that Georgia's not selling itself to receivers as well as it could be?
Well, I guess it would be great if there were more 300-yard games, but I still think the perception issue is maybe something folks need to get their arms around. I think he threw right at 30 touchdown passes last year, and there's the notion there that Georgia doesn't throw the ball around enough, and that's one thing that everybody's going to take a look at. But Georgia's identity is always going to be a run first, a physical downhill football team. That's the way they're built. But I think with Georgia, you look at what's happening now at the receiver position. Are they gonna close with another receiver? I think small prediction here is I think that graduate transfer card that Kirby Smart usually plays every summer. He likes to have a scholarship in his back pocket, per se, to go after a grad transfer. I think the wide receiver spot would kind of be very ripe for that, because that would be a one-year scholarship, finish out the year, and then 2020 receivers. We're going to start writing about a lot of 2020 targets this week, especially 2020 5-stars and 2020 guys. There's a lot of names right now. There's a guy like, Dazzlin Worsham, the Alabama receiver commitment, was in Athens on Junior Day over the weekend. So was Eddie Williams. So was E.J. Williams, excuse me. You've got Justin Robinson. That's the Eagles Landing Christian Academy receiver who's 6'4" and, sat next to Kirby Smart at the basketball game, the Kentucky basketball game. Rico Powers down in Savannah. Julian Fleming, actually, the number one receiver in the country, actually told me something very interesting that I thought ratcheted up Georgia's shot just a little bit there with him. The receiver is going to be another big year for Georgia in 2020. Lots of 2020 news is starting to trickle out. I'm starting to hear things about where guys are leaning. But I know there's still some focus on 2019 and how Georgia closes out this class with maybe 2 or 3 more spots.
All right, I want to talk about Charlton Warren and Kyrie Lam and all that kind of stuff. And I guess eventually this conversation also works its way to Florida's response by hiring Torian Gray now as its new defensive backs coach. But let me start with the Warren announcement over the weekend. You'd been very clear, Jeff, that you thought it would be a big deal if Georgia hosted Elam and couldn't tell him who its defensive backs coach was going to be. Well, as it turns out, in dramatic fashion, Georgia told the world while Elam was on campus. Is that as big of a flex move to you as it appears to be to me and many of our audience right now? There are a lot of Georgia fans who, that really brought the wow factor. Warren's a very impressive coaching hire in his own regard, but to announce it with Elam on campus, as I said, that almost took the negativity of the timing, why is it taking so long, and turned the timing into a positivity, the fact that you're able to announce that coinciding with the Elam visit. What did you make of Warren's hire and how it, potentially impacted Kyrie Lam, given that it happened while he was on campus?
Yeah, I think there's things with Georgia and Kaiir Elam that have always been very strong, very concrete, even before Mel Tucker's move to Colorado, even now with Charlton Warren as well. I think Georgia is, what do you say? You like to say, Brandon, you want to say 4D chess at times. That what the coach at Georgia plays. I think this was good for two reasons. I think, one, it filled Georgia with an able recruiter in the SEC who has a lot of relationships in the SEC. And everybody wonders, was the Warren move a checkmate move for Kaiir Elam? I would beg to differ with everyone out there because I think it's a checkmate move for not just a guy like Kaiir Elam, but guys like Lewis Seen loved him, Tyree Stevenson loved him. Remember, Tyree Stevenson was committed to Florida for a time. And you also think about names like Fred Davis, the class of 22, guys like legend class of 2020, that's the 5-star corner out of Jacksonville. You think about legend Cavazos. I think it was a multitude of names, not just Kaiir Elam, because I think Kaiir Elam had some strong Georgia ties even prior to Charlton Warren. But the other thing is it strengthens Georgia, and it also weakens Florida. And I think that's a 1-2 punch there, especially given the timing of it all. Underneath the umbrella of Charlton Warren's a good, well-respected teacher of the game and football coach. So when it hits every one of those boxes, it had to be a win-win-win for Georgia. But on the flip side of it, let's kind of balance out Jeff with some BA here. You called it a flex move, Brandon. Just exactly how big of a flex move was that for you when you saw that pop across your timeline over the weekend?
No, it was massive. It was. I think it, for me, checked every box in terms of being a coach that we all knew a little bit about. It had the ripple effect that it's the kind of topic that had the potential to trend on social media. This is not hiring some trivial name. This is hiring a guy from one of your biggest rivals with a head-to-head recruiting battle, kind of factoring into this. In terms of my overall excitement about it, Jeff, it was really the same as it would have been had Georgia hired a Derek Ansley or a Corey Raymond, two of the other big names that I had in mind for a role like this. In terms of, where I was on Saturday evening when I learned about this, my level of excitement as a fan was just as high for Warren as it would have been for the other two guys who I had said I'd wanted for this. And based on the reaction I was getting from other fans on Twitter, it certainly seems like most fans were kind of with me on this of, you better believe it, Kirby went out and did it. This really felt like a win as opposed to avoiding a loss. This really felt like a very proactive, aggressive move on the part of Kirby Smart, the kind of thing for which, as you know, he's become famous.
Yeah, moving the news cycle forward here, I'm going to be very curious to see when the contract details are released for Charlton Warren. I don't think those have been released yet, but when those do get released, I will wonder if, A, Georgia had to throw a Brinks truck at him to get him to leave Florida, or it was just maybe a nominal raise, just for the fact to work under a defensive-minded head coach, a defensive system that Smart has in place where he could kind of be groomed to be a coordinator, because he's going to coach some fantastic players, by the way. I mean, it's no secret that Georgia could have 4 or 5 corners next year that could start for a lot of teams in the SEC, including even Alabama, which went through a secondary rebuild during the 2018 season as well. It'd be very interesting. If it's a big number, well-deserved, but if it's a nominal number, then that also says something about the right to come to Georgia, the right to coach underneath Kirby Smart and this staff and this system. Warren's also an Atlanta, Georgia native, and I wonder if we'll ever hear that really he just wanted to get away from the brunt and the power and I guess the mammoth size of that Gator Hater countdown. I think that's what he wanted to get away from, Brandon.
He wanted to be on the other side. I like that. He wanted to be on the other side of that thing for a change. I don't mind that at all, Jeff. That's a really good thought. It's Jeff Sentell as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All here on DawgNation Daily. By the way, if you want to know more about big events happening in the Marlowe's Tavern near you or special offers they provide, become a Marlowe's Insider by texting the word Marlowe's, that's MARLOWS, to 24242. The number, once again, is 24242. Text the word Marlowe's, MARLOWS, no apostrophe, and you can become a Marlowe's Tavern Insider. All right, Jeff, a couple more things on the Warren Elam stuff, and then I want to hit a couple other issues very quickly before we let you go. I made the point yesterday that some coaches recruit players, some coaches recruit parents. You probably want both kinds of coaches as a part of your recruiting arsenal. For me, when you hear about the military background, when the no-nonsense attitude guy educated at the Air Force Academy, to me, Charlton Warren is a coach that recruits parents. And I think that's an important thing for Georgia to have. Mamas are going to love the idea of their sons being in his care for 3 to 4 years. That's what I like about Warren a lot, is I think he really goes to work and does a massive, massive recruiting job on the parents because they want to feel good about the program. And I think a guy of Warren's background just absolutely must be incredibly impressive for them in terms of the quality of person that Georgia's hiring for its coaching staff right now.
I think the other thing is look where Charlton Warren's resume has led him. So he's been in the SEC East with Florida. Before that, he was in the SEC East with Tennessee. So he's definitely seen what the conference is all about. He's seen, the big stadiums. He's seen the huge game plans. He's had to go up against some, terrific offenses. And I think that's going to help. It's not like Georgia's bringing in a guy. You look at it, Corey Raymond. You look at it, Derek Ansley. Never really much of a candidate, it seems like, but you look at it now with Charlton Warren. So you have a lot of names that are familiar with what's going on in the SEC, used to recruiting the very biggest names. And, again, Torian Gray, people don't remember this, but Torian Gray was at Florida a couple years prior. And it's funny how you remember names like William Poole, D'Angelo Gibbs. You remember guys like that talking about what type of recruiter Torian Gray was and how effective he was for Florida. Gray then moved on to the Redskins, I believe, but now he's back in Florida where it seems like a back and forth career move there for him as well. But now he's under the big boot print, that hobnail boot print of that Gator Hater countdown, and he's going to have to get used to that one as well because it looks a lot different than when he was back in Florida.
Well, let me ask you about Gray here for a moment, Jeff, before we turn the page on something else. I mean, the Florida people are already trying to spin this as a big-time hire, even though it appears to be a guy going backwards in his career after having spent the last 2 years in the NFL. But they're going to spin this as a big-time hire. I already have heard from a lot of Florida fans who think that they're still going to sign Kyrie Elam. That's what the fans are saying when it comes to that. I mean, what do you make of acting as quickly as they did by hiring a coach that does admittedly have a lot of experience going back to his time at Virginia Tech and knows the SEC a little bit, does have the NFL pedigree, to be fair and balanced, I guess, as much as I possibly can be? How much does it help Florida with a guy like Elam to strike as quickly as it did by bringing in Torian Gray?
Well, it's definitely a name. A lot of guys know him. I think every Florida fan in the world trotted out those stats about where the pass defense was ranked under Gray and how good those guys were, and yada yada yada. Everybody really trots out stats and pass defensive stats now, and really they're based on the type of players that were there in the program at the time. And I think really these hires here are all about relationships, and also the January timeline was pretty quick for Florida. I give them that because now's the time when most of the 2019 class has been put to bed that everybody starts working on the 2020 class. Georgia hosted a select group of elite juniors, just a few, this past weekend in Athens, and now they're going to do the same thing again this weekend in Athens with some more elite names, some more out-of-state names. And Clemson's doing the very same thing. Clemson's bringing in a lot of huge targets for the 2020 class this weekend as well. You got names like Brian Brzee, you got names like Miles Murphy, Julian Fleming. A lot of big names are heading to Clemson as well as, some of the biggest fish in the Southeast are ratcheting up for 2020 already with what looks like both barrels.
All right, let me do two quick 2019 things before we wrap up our Marlowe's Tavern tell-all for today. And let me begin with Mark Anthony Richards. And I thought your piece on Richards was really interesting at DawgNation.com, coming off what appears to have been a very good visit for him at the University of Georgia. And the description he gets about how he would be used certainly is pretty enticing. Jeff, here's where my feelings are complicated, though, and I really do need for you to kind of correct fact from fiction for me on this. Richards is a top 100 player in the entire country. Who wouldn't want a top 100 player on your roster, especially if you've got room for it? But it's the room issue that I guess have some questions about here. Georgia's limited with what it can sign in the remainder of the 2019 cycle, and certainly I would say that, for a guy like Elam, if you can get Elam, you want him to take one of those scholarship spots, and then you sort of decide, well, what else is left there at that point in time? And then if Richards is more of a running back than anything else, I know he's been kind of described as sort of the freak, but it also sort of feels like James Cook does some of the things that Mark Anthony Richards would likely do for Georgia, and I don't want to do anything to log jam the chances of a Kendall Milton or a Zachary Evans choosing Georgia for 2020. I am by no means telling you that Georgia shouldn't want Mark Anthony Richards. There's probably a lot of reasons why it definitely should. But in terms of the numbers part of all of this, isn't the story a little more complicated than that?
Well, two things. These are my immediate reactions. Number one, let me unpack a few things. Number one, Brandon, my man, when you start reciting off those 5-star running backs for 2020, you need to throw that name Marshawn Lloyd out of DeMatha Catholic squarely in the midst of that. I think his pecking order has jumped as the number 4 running back, even ahead of Zachary Evans right now, especially in the eyes of Georgia fans. Number two, this is just a different Georgia. I was telling somebody that just casual conversation that bumped into me in the grocery store the other day, and I was basically saying that this is really different the way it is covering Georgia's recruiting now compared to 2 or 3 years ago. It used to be guys would come on these visits, and you would sit there and you would talk to them, and you would be like, the fan base would want to know how they're feeling about Georgia. Does Georgia have a chance to sign them? Well, now it's totally different, man. It's now, will Georgia take him? Do they fit into Georgia? Will Georgia sign them? Is that a committable offer? Do they get to come on the program? That's a pretty seismic change in about 2 to 3 years here with Georgia recruiting. It's no longer, will this great prospect consider Georgia? It's, is Georgia going to take that guy if he wants to come? That's the different thing here. And for me, it's a different way to look at Georgia recruiting all across the board. Brandon, I don't think this staff operates anymore about, we're going to worry about 2020. What if we take this guy? What they do now with these recruiting cycles and these player infusions of talent, as they sit there and they load up the bus, they load up each running back room, wide receiver room, and they say, do we have the players for this season to go down there to go through 2019 and win a natty? And I'm going to use the young people's term there for national title, a natty. That's what they're doing. James Cook has a certain fit in the Georgia offense, but what happens if he gets hurt? What happens if he's really not the fit anymore? They need somebody in order to play that position. They need a guy like Mark Anthony Richards. Let's face it, very stark reality here that next year's running back room is going to miss DeAndre Swift. It's going to miss Brian Harrion. I'm talking about the 2020 running back room as it relates to recruiting. So then Georgia will have James Cook maybe, Kenny McIntosh, Zamir White. Georgia wants to get 5 or 6 backs at all time for that running back room, and that's what they're going to work off of. And I don't think how many they take in 2019 is really a concern about affecting 2020 anymore. That's not a program that wants to look a year ahead anymore. This is a program, the Georgia Bulldogs, that look to make sure they've got all the shelves stocked to go win a national championship this season. And if they feel they need another running back, that's what they're going to get.
Now, Jeff, normally the chasm between your coolness and hipness and mine is vast, and yet in this case, I do believe I got to correct you in one thing. I don't believe the kids are calling them natties anymore. I think the new term, the kids are calling them ships as opposed to championships. That's the kids' term now, right? Connor, who is much younger and cooler, he says no. I see that on Twitter all the time. They call them ships now, right? You got to go to the ship, right? That's what the kids say these days.
No,
isn't it?
Brandon, it's going to the title game means you're going to the ship. But if you want to win it all and hoist up that big trophy, that's called a natty. That's called a natty.
Oh, so the game itself is the ship, as in the championship game, but the actual trophy is not the ship. Okay, so that's I'll correct myself on that. We got about 30 seconds left, Jeff. I've kept you really, really long. Brett Seither, the tight end, when it comes to needs and availability and scholarship stuff, he visits. Georgia would seemingly need a tight end. Nada's going to the NFL, and Luke Ford transfers. Is this a no-brainer between Georgia and Seither, or is Georgia still considering other options, and is Seither considering other schools?
Sounds like Georgia is his leader coming out of that visit. Previous leader was TCU. That was to be expected. You saw the synergy of attention late for Georgia. He's one of the top remaining tight ends that are unsigned in the class. He's going to visit Alabama this weekend. That's another taste test he needs to see about. But Seither seems like a guy. If Georgia has 2, if Georgia has 3 spots, that will be very interesting. If they take 2 or 3, then maybe Seither's name comes into the mix. Maybe it's Seither and Elam. That's really something to look at there. I think Elam is to take no matter what. Going to have to watch that George Pickens situation there, just being honest. And then is it Seither? Then is it Mark Anthony Richards? I think that's what the staff is going to try and figure out.
Well, now, hold on now. You say you're going to have to watch that George Pickens situation. Does that watch it for a good reason or watch it for a bad reason? What do you mean by that?
I think that is a very complicated recruitment, Brandon, and sure. I think that's something where that might go. Georgia, should they sign, or anybody should they sign George Pickens, they might have to celebrate a few things. They might have to celebrate him signing. They might have to celebrate him eventually getting there. They may have to celebrate beating out or flipping or whatever. There's just a lot of things to look at there right now with George Pickens. That's the only thing that could make it any more complicated would be if he was a Major League Pro Baseball prospect.
Understandable, Jeff. Thanks for that. One more time before we let you go, let me remind folks that a week from today, we're back in Kennesaw, actually for the first time ever in Kennesaw, back in the Marlowe's Tavern, but our first appearance at the Kennesaw location. It's our Countdown to Signing Day event next Tuesday from 6 to 8 p.m. Let me show the address one more time on the screen, if you don't mind. 745 Chastain Road in Kennesaw. That's 745 Chastain Road in Kennesaw. A week from today, Tuesday, January 29th from 6 to 8 p.m. Please make plans to be with us there. It is going to be a great time. Jeff, thanks for your time here on the program today. As you promised earlier, we'll look forward to reading a bunch from you at DawgNation.com, and we'll see you tomorrow afternoon as well, as Before the Hedges returns. A little bit of recruiting talk tomorrow afternoon as well. We'll look forward to that too, Jeff.
All right, Brandon. Sorry, man. I had to come in halftime of your show today because I had some very good news to take on the phone.
Well, that's always a nice thing to hear. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Let me correct myself on one thing. If you're watching on video, when we were talking about Mark Anthony Richards, I have him listed as a 4-star running back. I guess the more accurate description right there is probably 4-star athlete. I think that's a really interesting recruitment nonetheless. I mean, it sounds like the plan for him in Georgia would be to take some handoffs and be used a little bit like a running back. I made the comparison between he and James Cook. That may be a little bit of the profile that he kind of fits in college, but it's probably more accurate to say that he's an athlete than a running back. But it really is kind of weird. He's one of the 100, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, he's like the number 99 player in the country. That's a pretty elite. It's a pretty elite recruit to have on your campus, and yet, just to be frank here, I'm trying to, move the pieces around the chessboard to say, where does he fit in, given everything that Georgia's trying to do here. It sounds like Jeff says that, listen, Georgia's going to bring in the best players it can and figure it all out later on. And certainly when you talk about best players available, Mark Anthony Richards definitely fits into that conversation. So that may be a story worth watching. By the way, we are rolling towards the Super Bowl, not this Sunday, but next Sunday. I would suggest it's probably the biggest gambling event of the entire year worldwide. And, well, you want to be involved in that. When you're hanging around with your friends there, watching the game at the big party, you want to have some action in on the game. You want to be a part of that conversation, right? And so if you've never gotten involved before, let me tell you this, that you want to get involved with a group that you can trust, a group that's going to give you that fast, no-hassle payout when you win. That's why here at DawgNation Daily, we would only recommend my friends at MyBookie, because they are known as the fast, no-hassle payout when you do win. And MyBookie's got an even better offer for you right now as you head towards the big game 2 Sundays from now. Your first deposit can be matched up to 50%, but you got to go right now to take advantage of that. The way that works is you're essentially a winner before you place your first bet. You get the 50% bonus right when you sign up. You got more money in your account than you started with, and then the action's all there for you. You play, you win, you get paid. But you got to remember a couple of things. Type in MyBookie. That's MyBookie. Type in MyBookie in your browser. The internet will do the work for you. And then when you get to MyBookie, use the promo code DawgNation to get your first deposit matched up to 50%. Then, as I said, after that, you play, you win, you get paid. Here's what I'm hoping here on DawgNation Daily. As we get closer to the game, can we do some prop bets? Can we kind of look at some of that a little bit? Now, I know that most of y'all want to keep Georgia football as much as possible, but as we mentioned this, looking at a couple prop bets here and there, I think it'd be a lot of fun too. So it's all there for you at MyBookie as we head towards the big game 2 Sundays from now. All right. A couple of SEC stories that I want to get to, and then before we close out, I will have a little bit of a response to maybe what some of y'all heard on the Feinbaum show yesterday, as the guy up in Kentucky was kind of bashing DawgNation a little bit. We will address that. I want to take care of some serious business before we get there. Jeremy Pruitt, the Tennessee coach, has responded to D'Angelo Gibbs, who is officially now on the Tennessee roster. I thought the quote from Pruitt was interesting in at least one regard. Pruitt says of Gibbs that D'Angelo is a guy that I knew, our staff knew in recruiting when he was coming out of high school. Here's where it gets kind of interesting. He's a guy that can play on either side of the ball. He's very tough and has unique ball skills. He's a very instinctive player. He has size and speed. We are happy to have him at Tennessee. It's really the part about him being able to play on either side of the ball that's interesting. Now, I think that Gibbs, as many of you are aware, probably has bigger issues than what position is he going to play. But in terms of the position that he might play, there are always plenty of Georgia fans who said that he could have had a home at wide receiver at Georgia. He was obviously very good at that in high school. It looks like, based on what Pruitt's saying here, they're at least going to try him at wide receiver. This may be something very similar to some of the stuff they've done in the past with guys like Alontae Taylor, where they float wide receiver as a possibility, as a way of maybe getting him on campus one way or another. Who really knows about that? But it does look like Tennessee is indeed going to give Gibbs a chance, assuming it all works out and he can be a part of that program, going to give him a chance there at wide receiver. Let me also address this. John Talty, writer for AL.com, goes in the Feinbaum show yesterday. We've been talking for a while now about this crazy way in which Nick Saban is cycling through assistant coaches, seemingly replacing all of the young recruiters from last year's staff with more established veteran coaches. It seems to be an example of what I believe is a short-term thinking on the part of Nick Saban. I believe the beginning of the end for him is emerging here, where all of a sudden he's not building based on a 5-year plan. He's trying to load up and win as much as he can with a talented roster that he does have, while he still has Tua Tagovailoa, for instance. Apparently there's some other thinking on this that's starting to fall in place. John Talty goes on the Feinbaum show yesterday. Feinbaum tweeted about this. I want to show you the tweet. Talty says, what you're seeing here is a course correction. You are getting more experienced coaches, Talty says. Nick Saban realized he went too young and had too many guys that were just recruiters and not coaches. Now, I find that to be very interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, it almost seems like a panic knee-jerk reaction to Saban getting out-recruited for the 2018 class, but also now maybe a panic knee-jerk reaction to losing a game to Clemson. In the fashion they did, we haven't really seen Alabama get blown out, so maybe some sort of response that is necessary. But all of a sudden you see the, I think, tendency to micromanage Saban, now trying to micromanage on both sides of this issue. And I do believe the clock is ticking for Saban's future at Alabama. And it's just a matter of, can a team like Georgia be the one to send him into retirement, or does it have to wait and benefit from the landscape in the SEC once he's gone? That could be a very interesting thing to think of. All right, a couple other recruiting issues I want to get to before we wrap up the SEC through. First of all, I saw Jamias Griffin, who arguably was among the best players in the state of Georgia this year, as a running back from Rome. He is decommitted from NC State. And I guess he recently took a visit to Auburn. I think Georgia Tech may be somewhat in the mix on this, maybe a little bit too. But Griffin's one of those guys that people who saw him say, that kid can play. Is he going to find a home, which, with all due respect to the folks in Raleigh, a bigger and better home than they are at NC State? Looks like he indeed is going to consider other places. And this may be an issue where, Auburn is going to be a little creative with its running back recruitment. They took DJ Williams back in December, maybe looking at Griffin right now. That could be an interesting story worth watching. And by the way, speaking of Auburn, this happened the other day, and I guess I didn't really realize it. We've talked about Austin Kendall, the possibility that he's going to West Virginia. I do want to make you aware he actually did commit to West Virginia. So I addressed on the show yesterday, at least wanted to follow up on that Kendall is indeed committed to West Virginia. So had a chance to go to Auburn, visited Auburn, but once Oklahoma stopped blocking his transfer as a grad transfer to West Virginia, that is apparently what Austin Kendall's going to do, and we'll make that your SEC through. All right, here on DawgNation Daily, quick story for a moment. You may remember a couple of weeks ago, there was this weird dust-up before Georgia announced James Coley as its offensive coordinator, that Georgia might have been in contact with Kentucky assistant Eddie Gran. Now, DawgNation's reporting on this has indicated that Georgia talked to Gran about a position coach role and never offered the offensive coordinator job to him. In Kentucky, there's a radio host named Matt Jones who's apparently going to put himself on a hill and then, expire on that hill, that somehow Eddie Gran was offered the offensive coordinator job at Georgia, full control over the Georgia offense, and Eddie Gran, because he's so deeply devoted to the University of Kentucky, rebuffed Georgia's offer, and he's going to stay at Lexington, and then they're going to write history together over the course of the next few years. That is the yarn that has been spun out of Lexington on this. And yesterday, Jones goes on the Feinbaum show and seemed to want to pick a little bit of a fight with DawgNation over this. This was the tail end of the interview. Many of you mentioned this to me, so I thought it was at least worth mentioning here. Here is Matt Jones trying to shoehorn, I don't know, some sort of beef, some sort of rivalry into the end of his interview with Feinbaum. Take a listen to this.
I was prepared because I thought you were going to come on here and grill me about DawgNation, and you got the whole thing and you didn't do it, so I appreciate it.
Well, that will be my final question.
Did I just set myself up there for that?
Well, no, you just I was snoozing, so you woke me up. What's the deal?
So Georgia offered Eddie Gran to be their offensive coordinator, and he turned it down, Kentucky's offensive coordinator. And the Georgia people, understandably, did not want to be seen as having gotten turned down by a Kentucky offensive coordinator, so they got all their reporters to say it didn't happen. And Georgia fans have just been angry, and all these DawgNation people call. And it's been very funny to watch because I thought if you're Georgia, why do you care? You guys are above it all. But they just have had some fans kind of lose their minds in the last couple of weeks because they lost their offensive coordinator to Tennessee and got turned back down by Kentucky's offensive coordinator.
You're speaking of just dog fans, not that website, DawgNation.
No, that website has been part of it, no doubt. Their people were very much like, the KSR guy made it up.
Look, it's not on. This is not a rivalry between DawgNation and some radio guy in Kentucky, because the honest truth is Jones' beef isn't with DawgNation at all. If you want to go back and look at his Twitter feed when all this happened, remember, he tweeted Football Scoop, a very respected website that does a lot of coaching, rumors and things like that, as essentially verifying his report about Eddie Gran. But then Jones has to go back and delete that tweet later on because Football Scoop dug into this independently on their own and eventually changed his own reporting on this, essentially saying it was an exaggeration that Eddie Gran had been offered the offensive coordinator job at the University of Kentucky. I mean, listen, this is a much bigger deal in the Bluegrass State than it is around DawgNation. I can certainly promise you that. But I guess this is going to be a big deal there. So congratulations to the Wildcats for finding a way to hold on to Eddie Gran. I'm sure you guys will have a great time in the Belt Bowl with him next December. I did really like, though, one of our DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers who I thought had the best response to this on Twitter not too long ago. It's our buddy Joel Sidney Kelly who tweeted out a screen grab. Source tells KSR Eddie Gran was offered a position on an alien aircraft, but he's leaning towards staying at UK. And then Joel's got his picture there. He's really good on the Photoshop stuff, and he's a regular in the DawgNation forum at forum.dawgnation.com. I thought that was really funny. And frankly, this whole thing is really, really funny. And as I said, probably not that big of a deal to anybody around DawgNation. What is a big deal, though, is our Gator Hater Updater. And I'm really happy to let you know it has now been 815 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten UGA. That number's going up, and we'll see you tomorrow. And here on video, you can have your chance to weigh in. We are a little late now, but we got a little bit more time for a few comments here and there, so we'll give you a chance to do that on both Facebook and YouTube. So we'll get a chance to do that. Kathy Aquavia Green says, lost our offensive coordinator. Okay, he's delusional. Yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing you got to understand. First of all, on small town radio in remote parts of Kentucky, it's hard to fill time as it is. So stories like this certainly help you do that. And as we said at the time, when it comes to the Eddie Gran, the initial reporting that came out, it's good to be first. Now, I'm not a reporter by trade, but I have kind of been around the block a little bit. And here's what I'm pretty sure other reporters would say: you want to be first. You want to be the first one to report something. But it's generally speaking a pretty dangerous place to be as the only one to report something. I think that's the problem that the radio host got himself into when it comes to the Eddie Gran situation. Now, I'll also say this, what I thought was really funny about the clip too, I ran out of time to mention this during the regular broadcast, is that this is after kind of a long interview. Matt being in Kentucky is a little bit of a basketball guy. They're talking about basketball or whatever. But, having been on the Feinbaum show a few times, this is one of those things where it almost seems like he was like, hey, Paul, make sure you ask me about those guys over at DawgNation. Paul's got like a 4-hour radio show. He's, not thinking about that. And so at the end, he's going to make sure he shoehorns his way into that discussion to make sure he gets his jab in there. I mean, listen, this is this is the kind of silly stuff that gets done during the off season. But congratulations to him for his heroic reporting, and Eddie Gran for his courageous decision to stay at the University of Kentucky. Let me get some YouTube comments here too, and we can kind of react to anything you want to. Enrique Murillo says that Charles Baxter is my fake name. That is my fake name, and Jeff Sentell did release that to the world about a year or so ago. If you ever see an alias of Charles Baxter, there's a decent chance that's me, for sure. Kristen Phillips says Kentucky is that annoying kid in class that no one wants to be friends with. It is kind of funny though that if you look at the SEC East for next year, like I don't think Kirby's going to forget about this Eddie Gran situation. I really don't think it's that big of a deal to fans. I don't think fans by and large believe this, and they don't believe that because of what the DawgNation reporting was. Listen, I mean, y'all know that I'm not the reporter around here, but the reporters that are here have a serious job to do, and they're going to vet their sources, vet their information. They're going to report what they report. But regardless of the DawgNation report, for most fans, they already looked at that Gran situation and said, there's no way that's true, right? I mean, Georgia was never going to do anything to make James Coley mad. Would it have liked to have, considered Eddie Gran as opposed to what's his name, the tight end coach they hired? Maybe so. As another offensive assistant, would that be a possibility? There's a chance that Kirby Smart would have considered all avenues there. But he was never going to look at James Coley and say, even though you've recruited South Florida for us as if that's where the University of Georgia was located, we're going to now anger you, give a bunch of money to some, rando from up in Lexington, Kentucky. Kirby was just never going to do that. Just doesn't really pass the smell test. But what I was getting to is that, fans get over stuff like that pretty quickly because they never really bought into it to begin with. But you better believe that Kirby Smart, I think, is going to have a little bit on his mind when Kentucky comes to Athens next year. And all of a sudden the SEC East, given the fact that, Georgia, takes Charlton Warren, Jim Chaney goes to Tennessee, Eddie Gran tried to use a radio host to, kind of spin his own narrative. All of a sudden the SEC East got a little extra oomph behind it next year. All of a sudden some of these SEC East games going to have a little juice behind them. I guess Georgia and South Carolina don't have a ton of that right now because I think Kirby and Muschamp are still friends. You give them a couple years, maybe something happens there. But for now, they seem to be getting along just fine. But boy, there's a lot of bad blood now between some of these other schools, which makes the division a lot more fun. TM says, I jump in the comments. We're talking about Eddie Gran next. Yeah, I mean, see, that to me is a pretty reflective statement of how most Georgia fans feel. They just wanted that end of the Gran situation to begin with. Tram Dickerson says we'll take Eddie the Blind Squirrel over Eddie Gran. Listen, you let Eddie call some plays, and I think he'll do pretty well there. Enrique Murillo says I'm going to be at Fort Knox tomorrow. I'll take my DA photo. So I guess that's kind of a cool place to be, I guess. Let me go over to Facebook here for a moment, get a few more comments over here. Joe Rush says there ain't going to be no beef. They're losing their two best players, Snell off the offense, Allen off the defense. Yeah, there may be a thing there as well. Somebody said about me voting the sticker on my laptop. He says, Kevin Chapman, B.A. glad you voted. How long are you going to keep that sticker on your laptop? I guess I sort of forget which stickers are on here. Maybe I'm going to support my civic duty for a little while longer there. Robert Barnes says Gran just pulled a Gus bus on the Wildcats, LOL. Craig Fowler says Gran is unsweet tea. I mean, listen, for the most part, for Georgia, they were never going to recreate a different offense anyway. Georgia was happy with the offense that it was running. Now, a lot of Georgia fans don't feel that way, but that's the way I think the program itself felt. To get things back to recruiting, John William Adams says, B.A., Nick Cross or Kyra Elam, no bad choices. Who do you prefer? Straight up Cross for me, but because it's us or the Gators, my choice is Kyra Elam. So I think if you want to evaluate the two players, I think that's really interesting. I think that, Jeff will tell you in terms of the chances of getting one, the Elam chances are just far greater than Nick Cross. Even though Cross tweeted what he tweeted the other day when Charlton Warren was hired, I think Jeff just feels like that ultimately Cross is more likely to land somewhere else, whether it be I'm not even really sure, who his favorite schools would be. Sticking with Florida State, I guess Penn State's been mentioned in there. But I think Georgia has a better chance with Kyrie Elam. I mean, this is one of those examples where, Jeff's opinion on Elam has really influenced mine, even though I've been, as many of you are aware, very obsessed with wide receivers and things like that. Jeff has been saying all along that's the player that Georgia needs to get more so than anybody else because it's battling these teams like Alabama that do have these top-flight wide receivers. So my opinion on Elam has been heavily influenced by Jeff's, and from that standpoint, I just think it'd be great to have him. I feel very much the same way about Elam being paired with Stevenson and DJ Daniel as I do about some of these other positions. When you stockpile guys at a position, you just have a greater chance of finding someone who can really break out and be pretty good. And that's what Georgia's going to have a chance to do there. Let me go get some more comments. And when it comes to the situation with the Wildcats, John Arena says, we beat Kentucky by more than 28 this fall in Athens. I mean, yeah, listen, even with some of this kind of stuff going on, I mean, there is still a very good chance that Georgia's a heavy favorite over every team that it plays in the SEC East this fall. I hear the rumblings from our studio, our control room. That means that our buddy Connor Riley's ready to join us. Connor, good morning. Welcome to you.
We've got a little bit of breaking news here. We had previously announced that G-Day is set for April 20th. We now have a time as well. It is going to be at 2 p.m. on April 20th.
Okay, I got to admit something. When you said that way, I was bracing for bad news. Something about the very serious newsman voice you adopted there. I have some breaking news to announce. We have previously reported ... I'm like, oh gosh, what's not going to be true now that we've reported? So 2 p.m. for G-Day on April 20th. My guess is that's probably a pretty favorable TV destination there that day. You probably get some pretty good TV coverage. Georgia and Alabama are typically spring games on the same day, so the big ESPN crew may be there in Tuscaloosa that day if it holds with traditions past, but I don't think any Georgia fan on a nice, generally pretty good weather day on a Saturday in April are going to have any kind of quarrels whatsoever with 2 p.m. for that start there.
Game was on ESPN last year. Both Alabama and ESPN were ESPN games, so there's still a good chance that is again the case this year.
Yeah, so I think I think that's pretty interesting. I like the idea of that, and I will say, Connor, I'm really interested in this year's G-Day, and I think we find a way and a reason to be interested in that for a lot of reasons every single year, but there are some legitimate questions being answered this year. I mean, do we see Zamir White get a carry during G-Day, or is that just too soon? Probably.
That's the only thing I have sort of any interest in with this G-Day is, does Zamir White, do we see, one, how much does Zamir White actually practice in the spring, full contact and everything? Two, does he actually get a carry in the
And it may just be too soon, right? I mean, it just may just be too soon, and they may choose to be more careful. But assuming that James Cook is healthy, does he look more like a running back that can really factor into that conversation for Georgia this year? And I say assuming he's healthy because we saw him in a boot back during the Sugar Bowl. They didn't get a ton of coverage just because for a lot of different reasons, but that's worth paying attention to. Are you not curious about the backup quarterback competition? No. As it stands now with a Stetson Bennett or Dwan Mathis, I mean, you got to have a capable number 2 quarterback. I'm actually kind of fascinated to see if one of those two guys looks like he could be that.
I mean, Jeff has said this. I mean, if Jake Fromm gets hurt next year, there is no national championship.
That's true.
So,
but listen, I don't expect anybody in the backup quarterback role to be as effective as Justin Fields could have been, or Jake Fromm would have, been in 2017 had Jacob Eason not gotten hurt. I'm not asking for that, but is there a stopgap holdover at all? Can you compete at all in any game for, a quarter and a half if you've got a guy like that in the game? I am very curious to see.
I mean, in preseason games, do New England Patriots fans get excited to see Brian Hoyer versus Danny Etling? Not really.
Well, I mean, in this case, is all you got. Though. I mean, it's opposed to that or nothing.
I mean, I stand by my take.
By the way, Thomas Bates says, speaking of quarterbacks, you think John Rice Plumlee ends up at Auburn. Plumlee does visit Auburn. I should have mentioned that. I should have asked Jeff about that. He does visit Auburn over the weekend. I saw the pictures there. You got a John Rice Plumlee take now, Connor. What do you think that story's?
His jersey actually did fit this week.
Yeah, go back and look at that picture of him from Mississippi State. You know how they sell those like kids versions of these uniforms at like your local big box retailer? That looked like what Plumlee was wearing in Starkville a couple of weeks ago. The Auburn uniform, at the very least, did fit. I honestly don't know where this story is going to end up. I don't know.
Auburn just seems like a weird fit. Like obviously, I think Gus Malzahn wants, his scheme sort of fits what Plumlee does well. But, they bring in Bo Nix. They've got Joey Gatewood, Malik Willis. They've got, a lot of other guys there. And, with Nix already there, I don't really know why Auburn would make a ton of sense for Plumlee. Whereas I do think if he does end up coming to Georgia, I think when Fromm leaves, whether it be next year or the year after that, depending on who Georgia brings in the 2020 class, I think there's a good chance Plumlee could one day end up being a starting quarterback for Georgia, as much as you probably don't want to hear that.
Yeah, the only thing I could see for Plumlee at Auburn is, and they've done this a lot before, where they pitch him on the idea of quarterback right now, but they really have planned, because up until a few months ago, he was actually classified as an athlete. Now, he's classified as a true dual threat quarterback now. He's a really good baseball player. I mean, he is like a legit athlete. I mean, I guess there's a chance that maybe down the line, Auburn can see him in a different position. They're just sort of selling him on quarterback now in the hopes to get him and then convince him to play something different later on.
Certainly.
Whereas a place like Mississippi State, I could see him being more of a true quarterback. Auburn, because of the credit stuff they do have, and they're still trying to make a strong run at Robbie Ashford for the class of 2020 right now, who I think is probably a better prospect than Bo Nix is. It just may be too crowded of a quarterback situation when it's all said and done.
I would agree. Also, I believe I've seen like Miami's a school interested in him. They've got a ton of quarterbacks now that you add Tate Martell into the mix. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. I think there's on today, January 22nd, I feel moderately comfortable that I think John Rice Plumlee is going to end up coming to Georgia, which, I'm someone who, I'm not super high on Dwan Mathis. Stetson Bennett is Stetson Bennett. Just a random aside. Your nickname's the Mailman. I have no confidence in you whatsoever because Karl Malone just absolute fraud. So that's.
I think the Mailman's a great nickname.
I think it's terrible.
I think it's a great nickname.
Mail fraud is what it should be. I think Plumlee could be a very interesting piece to the Georgia offense in the future.
By the way, Chris Branham agrees with me that we got to have two different tones of voices for breaking news announcements. Now, I've told you before, I love like the stature of a newsman. I like to occasionally pop my papers like you see the old school news guy do on TV. But if you're coming in with like sort of a happy news, hey, it's going to be a sunny day on April 20th and the game's going to be at 2 p.m., you got to have a little bit different cadence than the Chris Branham says that you gave the same delivery for the G-Day start time breaking news as you did for the Justin Fields' transferring breaking news. I feel like we got to have a couple different cadences for those things, a couple different tones of voice.
I'll work on my Walter Cronkite.
All right, let me get a few more comments, and we're going to get out of here, at least close to on time today. Where are we going with the comments here? Let me go over to YouTube for a moment. We haven't been over there in a while. All right, over here on YouTube. Where are we going here? Dean Butler says, if looking back, Fields was quick to run. I'm not doing the Fields thing right now. Daniel Moore says, how about this one? This is a good one. Georgia will be in the playoffs the next 2 years, and you can book it. And I guess kind of that does kind of, sort of gravitate more in the direction of what we talked about yesterday with, 2019 being a crucial season, sort of a win-now type mentality for Georgia. But assuming that Fromm doesn't leave to go to the NFL after his junior season, which he certainly could, but assuming that he does, I don't see the scenario in 2020 being all that different than 2019. That this to me looks like a real 2-year run here for Georgia, assuming that it holds on to Fromm, a real 2-year run to get a national championship, but to not have won a national championship, to not have put back-to-back playoff appearances in the board of the next 2 seasons. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. That would certainly feel like a major disappointment given the expectations for Georgia right now. We have now graduated to the point where it's not 2017 anymore, and Georgia making the playoff was a pleasant surprise, a fun ride we all enjoyed. For 2019, 2020, it really is playoff or bust. I mean, at that point in time, Georgia is underwhelming if it's not in that postseason and if it doesn't find a way to win the thing in one of those 2 years.
I would agree. To the point yesterday, we talked a lot about, why the 2017 season was so much fun, and I think a reason why it was just wasn't that expectation for that. Expectations and sort of having to live up to them isn't fun. I'm a big New England Patriots fan. Like, the regular season is not fun to me. The only thing that matters is the playoffs. And I think Georgia, with the way, if you want to win championships and you want to be contending for championships every year, that's just sort of the reality that you now have to live in, where, you can't really take solace in beating Florida by 19 points in the offseason when, the season ends with a loss in the Sugar Bowl to Texas, which is what no one really wanted. So
Gary Stokes says that G-Day is going to be in a movie. Have you heard this? Wouldn't surprise me, given all the movies that are filmed here, like a football-type scene situation. That would not surprise me at all, but I haven't heard that's happening this year.
I have not heard that either.
But it would not surprise me, just given the number of movies filmed in the state of Georgia here. Tram Dickerson says Dwan Mathis is the smartest guy in America. Who wouldn't want a quarterback behind Georgia's offensive line with these backs and getting a chance to learn? The one thing about Mathis is I do think it's a really interesting skill set to be tall and run the way that he does. That's a pretty unique combination. I do think he's got some, throwing mechanic stuff that he's got to work on a bit, and I think he's going to be patient with himself and give himself a chance to do that. The interesting thing with a guy like Mathis is that he may be one of those guys that sort of quarterback the way that quarterbacks used to be, one of those things where you grow into a quarterback over the course of a career, as opposed to what seems to be not just at Georgia but everywhere now, where it's you're either a quarterback and you're ready to play or you are not, and the cycle moves pretty fast. Mathis may turn out to be a little bit of a throwback there in that regard. Tyler Stoller also asking about George Pickens, saying if he does come, and you heard Jeff Sentell earlier today say, y'all be careful, that's a really complicated recruitment. But Tyler says if he does come, can he beat out J.J. Holloman or Demetrius Robertson? I think the audio that we played from Kirby Smart earlier in the program is a reminder of, even though my assumption is always going to be that the elite talent is going to win out, Kirby Smart there is going to say, hold on, not so fast, not necessarily, be really careful with that. And I think that's a pretty good reminder here that, even though the elite athletes are going to be favored, and we saw the stat that popped up yesterday about how more than 40% of the guys playing in the Super Bowl are former 4- and 5-star players, elite athletes just have a really good chance of blossoming. That's not always the case, and sometimes you have a guy like J.J. Holloman, who wasn't even a top 10 receiver, in the country for the class of 2017, who has certainly had the look of a guy that's more than capable of really succeeding in the SEC. It is not a foolproof prediction, even though you certainly lean in the direction of the elite athlete certainly emerging. Trey Clark says, I certainly wouldn't mind a quarterback coming in and sitting back a year and learning behind someone. Yeah, I mean, honestly, apart from the names and the personalities and everything else, I mean, I do think that one of the lessons learned from the Georgia situation when it comes to quarterbacks, of bringing in Eason, then Fromm, then Fields in 3 consecutive years, I mean, some people are going to say that Georgia just needs to try to create more class separation in the future. I'd like to say no to that. I'd like to say you treat quarterback like any other position, and you try to sign as many good ones as you can. That's what I would certainly like to see done. That's certainly what I would hope to see done there in that regard. Connor, your mic is up. We are hearing that coming through the air here. I'd like to see that be a thing, but the problem is you can't get quarterbacks to want to come and contribute to depth. They come in here, they pop in here, and then if they don't make it, they're looking to go somewhere else. So I don't know how you create depth in the quarterback room without a little bit of class separation. That's one of the things that not just Kirby Smart's going to have to deal with, but all coaching have to deal with moving forward. So we shall see. Really fun comments, really great conversation today. We really appreciate you being a part of that. We'll have more recruiting stuff tomorrow afternoon as part of Before the Hedges at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We're also back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily Live. Really looking forward to that. Stay close to DawgNation.com. There's plenty of news still out there. Oh, yeah, one thing I did want to address before we go, and I just totally forgot about this. Somebody mentioned earlier, why it is that Kirby Smart hasn't announced the defensive coordinator yet. I think this is an issue where with 10 coaches already on staff, we know some version of how this is going to work out. Chip Towers even said this yesterday, that Dan Lanning, by almost anyone's account, is going to get a portion of control of the Georgia defense. He's at the very least a co-defensive coordinator, and it's just a matter of, is he DC, or is this him being co-DC along with a Glenn Schumann, or I guess maybe even Charlton Warren, the new defensive backs coach, should potentially be in the mix for a co-DC role there as well, depending on what it took to get him to leave the University of Florida. But in terms of the drama of this announcement, for me, sort of assigning the duties of who's going to be defensive coordinator is nowhere near as dramatic as who's going to be the defensive backs coach. So when it comes to the real coaching drama at Georgia, that would appear to be over. Georgia has rounded out its coaching staff. It's now hired its 10th coach. It's just a matter of now of who gets the title of defensive coordinator. But these guys, much the same way the Georgia offense worked in concert a lot last year with James Coley and Del McGee having some influence over what was going on. You're going to see a lot of different influence on the Georgia defense this year. It's just a matter of who gets that title, and in some form or fashion, it certainly seems like we're heading the direction of that being Dan Lanning. And as it stands right now, Kirby's probably not in much of a mood to make that announcement, but that announcement will come, I would reckon, sooner rather than later. So I guess stay close for that once it becomes official. Nonetheless, hope you all have a great day. Thanks for being with us here today. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Back again, once again, for DawgNation Daily Live.